writers, you're listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast, where we bring you insights and inspiration for growing your self-publishing business. I'm your host, Tara Kremen, the director of Kobo Writing Life. On the podcast this week, we chatted with Amanda Lewis, and Amanda is an award-winning book editor, writer, publishing strategist, and creative coach. She has an extensive background in the publishing industry, having worked as an associate managing editor and acquiring editor at Penguin Random House Canada for 8 years. Following her time at Penguin Random House, she became the inaugural editorial director at Page 2. Currently, Amanda owns and operates her own editorial studio, Amanda Lewis Creative Inc., where she provides editing and coaching services to independent writers and organizations. She specializes in editing memoirs, business books, and novels, and has edited beyond 200 books. Outside of her editing work, she's also a writer, and she released her debut travel memoir, Tracking Giants. We chatted to Amanda about her writing of this book, Tracking Trees. I talked about trees for probably too long, but she also gave some really great insights into the editing process, what this looks like, and what specifically indie authors can learn to have a better relationship with their editor and to make sure that it really is a collaboration and a partnership. I think my main takeaway was that all edits are suggestions, and to Amanda, the writer is first, last, and always. So please listen on. I hope you enjoy. So this week on the podcast, we are joined by editor and writer Amanda Lewis. Thank you for joining us, Amanda.
Well, thanks for having me.
Can you tell listeners a little bit about yourself and how you got into working in the publishing industry and becoming an editor?
Sure. So I studied literature at university and I finished my master's, and I was looking for, what's next. And a lot of my friends were starting their PhDs, and I desperately didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be in grad school anymore. So I went to one of my profs and said, I just don't really know what to do. And she said, why don't you go into publishing? And it hadn't dawned on me before, but then it made perfect sense because I'd always edited. I worked part-time as an editor through the university's learning center. And I was the school magazine's newsletter or school magazine's editor. And I was studying print culture. So just all the pieces were there. And so I said, yeah, okay. And I joined the SFU, so Simon Fraser University's publishing program. And at the time, it was a 2-week immersion program in the summer. And I thought, no harm, no foul. If it doesn't work out, it's only 2 weeks. But I really liked it. And I liked the creative aspect and the speed of publishing. At least in that immersion program, lots of times publishing is very slow, which maybe we can get into. But I just liked it. I liked the people. And so I applied to do an internship at Random House in Toronto and then moved out there. So that was 2007, so a long time ago now.
Nice. So you're an editor first before the publishing industry. I feel like that's an interesting kind of way to go into it. And funny that it didn't occur to you because I feel like people have such strong feelings about wanting to become editors in publishing.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I just always was an editor before being a writer, and I gravitated towards that. I would edit my dad's writing and just, can I get an extra set of eyes on this kind of thing? Mm-hmm. And but I didn't know about editors. I didn't know that was a job you could have. Growing up on the West Coast, West Coast of Canada, there are lots of small publishing houses, but it's not like a thing that they trot out at job fairs. Like you can be an editor at a publishing house. So I just didn't know it was something I could pursue.
Oh, that's a good point. Mm-hmm. I wonder if you could share maybe your overall kind of philosophy when it comes to editing and, what do you believe are some of the more important aspects of the editing process?
Oh, overall philosophy, all the edits I make are suggestions, and they're always made with the good intention to connect the writer to the reader. And so when I'm working with a client, I spend a good deal of time upfront just figuring out who the reader is and why the writer is working on this book and how they want to reach them. And sometimes they might have an idea of what they want the book to feel or sound like. Like they say, I want it to be really funny because it's going to connect with this audience. And maybe that humor isn't coming across in that current draft. So we work to add that to really connect with that audience. Or we add more stories, because stories are always a great way of connecting. But they're always suggestions. So writers can veto any suggestions at any point. And I really believe that editors are on the side of of the writer. And another editor in this space often says, like, reader first, last, and always. But as an editor, I think it needs to be like the writer first, last, and always, because writers have different goals depending on the genre that they're working on, or their style of publishing, or their energy levels, or their money levels. So we just figure out what's possible.
Nice. So let's go back to basics a little bit when it comes to editing. And can you give us like a real brief overview of like the different types of editing, like developmental, like copy editing, proofreading, and how each of them serve an author's manuscript?
I would be happy to. And this is something that I cover a lot with writers, because you hear editor and your mind automatically thinks of like an editor in a New York skyscraper, reading a stack of manuscripts, or like the Devil Wears Prada type of vibe. And it's not nearly as glamorous as that. And not every editor does the same type of editing. Just as you wouldn't expect, like a mechanic. Like, I need a mechanic. Well, what kind of mechanic? And like, what's the nature of the problem? So I am a developmental editor, also called a substantive editor. And we look at the whole manuscript and try to figure out that writer-reader connection, the structure of the manuscript, the flow, also the pace, so like the speed at which a reader would engage with the content. Do the examples work? Are the sources backed up? Like, is it believable? And we do that work usually over a couple of rounds of reviewing the manuscript and tightening up the content and just making sure it's really sharp, makes sense. Sometimes developmental editors focus more on the idea before the manuscript even exists. So I do that really in like a coaching relationship. So you want to write a book about horses. That's cool. What is it about horses that you like? Is it a memoir about your time on a horse farm, or is it about how to care for horses? And then we figure out what chapters would go into that. I really like that kind of work because it really feels like co-creation, which is a real key guiding principle for me as an editor. And so that's where I do the majority of my editing these days, is in that developmental and substantive field. After that wraps, so you have a manuscript that you're really proud of, your editing work is not over. So sometimes we would suggest to a writer that they sign up for another round of line editing, which helps to really hone the meaning at the line level. So going sentence by sentence, reducing any unnecessary words, any repetition. We don't need this paragraph. You referred to this example of the rabbit 2 pages back. Let's cut that out. And from there, we go on to copy editing. And a copy editor is the person who deals with like the nuts and bolts of the manuscript. Grammar, accuracy. If you have a character named Steve on page 2, they're still called Steve by page 22. The character's hair doesn't change color. It's like really checking for consistency, which is also a role that exists in film. If you've ever done that, if the listeners ever done any kind of film work where you spot a discrepancy between scenes, that's what a copy editor does. And then the final stage of editing is proofreading, and that happens once the book has been typeset. So it looks like the pages that you'd see in a printed book, and they read for typos and also errors in layout of visuals and headers, all the visual components. Proofreading is probably my favorite type of editing because I find it really soothing. I liken it to like getting your teeth cleaned. Like, it's just like a deep cleaning of a manuscript. And as an editor who deals mostly in substantive area, once you get to the proofread, those decisions should have been made. So it's just looking for small errors, like cleaning out a junk drawer or something. You're like, this doesn't belong in here.
So you're a substantive editor now, primarily, you were saying, but have you done each kind of one of these over the years and kind of figured out, I don't really like that piece, I prefer this piece?
Definitely, yeah. So a lot of editors start out proofreading and then go into copy editing and then into substantive editing. It's a great way to just learn how books are made. If you start kind of in reverse, you look at the production mode and then work backwards to what were the decisions that went into having this character or this chapter. And it's not that one is more developed than the other or harder or like you have to earn your stripes or anything. It's just a different way of thinking about books. So I think proofreading is a great way to just get your foot in the door and learn about the production side, because when you're doing that substantive editing, you might not think that this would be key, but it is, especially in books that have a lot of visual components, or even lots of levels of headings, and anything that you see kind of designed on a page is a decision that might have been made at the substantive level. So, for example, I'm working on a book right now about saving seeds, and it's for seed farmers. And it's fascinating. And because that book is going to be very visual, much later in the process, we're figuring out, okay, what are the photos? What are the levels of heads? So like the levels of the text, how big is it going to be on the page? And I was reading it earlier today and thinking, I can't quite see this example. Can we have an illustration here? But those questions I might not have been able to ask if I hadn't started out as a proofreader and really known how the two work in tandem.
And where does a beta reader come into it then?
Beta reader, great question. So beta readers are the people who are not editors necessarily, but usually trusted colleagues, advisors, friends of the author. And they are really supposed to represent the target reader. So again, if you're writing that book about horses, don't go asking your friend who knows nothing about horses. Like ideally, ask someone who works with horses or in that industry. And they give advice and feedback on the draft manuscript. My clients always ask me, should the beta read happen before the substantive edit or after or during? And the short answer is it depends, because our work, as I said, might just happen before the manuscript. And then they write a manuscript, or in the course of working with me in the revision, the manuscript changes dramatically. So I usually advise people to wait until they've gone through one round of revisions and that they're happy with that content, and then seek a beta reader to see how it's landing for that intended audience, and then go back for another round of editing.
Yeah, I wonder if there's ever the complication of the beta readers creating maybe significant changes and you have to sort of go through the whole process again. But I guess it is a process.
It is a process. And this is something that writers often aren't prepared for, because they've been working on this manuscript for months or years, and they had a couple people weigh in on it, and it's, feeling good. And they start working with an editor, and we suggest loads of revisions that they hadn't planned on. And suddenly their timeline is pushed and they've got to write another chapter, or that chapter they loved. We suggested that they cut it. And so it feels like it's back to square one. So I think having beta readers ideally throughout the process is best, but it's generally unpaid. So you can only rely on kindness of people for so long. So I usually, like, to get the most bang for your buck, do a round of editing, then do the beta reader, then do a round of editing, and then see where you're at.
I think that leads into my next question, where I wanted to know what you think is really key for a successful relationship between an editor and a writer. And is there something that authors can do to come best prepared to work with their editors?
Yeah, I think openness and curiosity are really key, because as I just mentioned about the timeline, a lot of writers are really attached to the outcome, and their book might end up totally different than they planned, and hopefully better than they planned. But a lot of people I'll have a discovery call with someone and they'll say, I'm just looking for a light edit. And then I start reading it and think, well, we just need a bit more than a light edit here. Are you willing to do that work? So generally now when I start to work with writers, I ask them just upfront, like, how open are you to doing revisions without having read a word? Just if this comes down to it. And I think that's really key. But like underlying that is an element of trust. So having the trust on both sides, like writers should trust that their editor has their best interest at heart, that they're going to do the best possible job, that they're going to meet their deadlines and not exceed their project estimates and all of that. And the editor also needs to trust that the writer is going to do their work well and not disappear for months on end, which happens all the time with writers. And
really?
Because they're hiding from the revisions. And that's when I start worrying. I'm like, are you doing okay over there? And that they will pay on time. And just my big thing with writers is if you're having a trouble, just put your hand up. This is literally my job. Like, this is literally my job to help you write this thing or revise it. And sometimes I think people get that perfectionist tendency or imposter syndrome, or something stops them and they just kind of blank out. And writers who are listening to this, please don't do that. Please ask your editor for help.
I think that's a great takeaway. If there's anything from this that I wrote down, that the writers are first, last, and always, and ask for help from their editors.
Yes, definitely.
So in your experience, do you see any kind of common mistakes that indie authors might make during the editing process, or if there's any trends that you've noticed?
Yeah, so I find that indie authors, because they're literally doing it themselves, they have a tendency to want to do it all themselves, all at once, and it creates real headaches and like unnecessarily so. So they might still be working on the manuscript and we're going through the edit and it's going well, but over somewhere else where I can't see, they're working on the cover and they're working on their marketing plan. And if that works for them and if it works for their budget and if they have the time to do it, great. But a lot of writers put pressure on themselves to have it out, like, I want it out by summer. I want it out by, 2 months from now. And unless there's a real reason, like there's an event to tie it to, or there's some related program they're launching with their business, there's usually, like, that's just a created pressure. They don't need to do that. So focus on the edit and get it in a really good shape. And while the manuscript is going through those other layers of editing, like as I said, the proofreads, like that visit to the dentist, that doesn't take long and it requires less of your writer brain to deal with those types of queries. So save that time for working on your cover and getting your marketing plan in place. If you want to launch a pre-sales campaign, you can start doing that without having everything in place. You don't need to have a final cover. You don't have to have all your blurbs in place. You don't even have to have the edit finished. Just trust that there will be time as long as you give yourself the time. Like, give yourself more runway and ask for help. Because if I were to self-publish something right now, I know who to ask to do certain things. And I know that I don't want to design the cover. Like, I'm not the one to do the marketing plan. I have some ideas, but I would much rather pay someone to do that because it will take me much longer to learn how to do those things well. So gather your team around you and work within your budget.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. It can be hard with indie authors where there's sometimes, I think, a bit of a misconception that, rapid release is it. But it's more about balancing the expectation of your readers. If you release one book a year, great. Just release it around the same time. 2 a year, great. One every quarter. I don't know how people do it, but they do. But like to your note there as well about saying, like, giving yourself enough runway to be able to achieve what you've told the readers that you're going to do.
That's really key. Yeah. So managing readers' expectations, because if I were following a writer and they were really keen for their next installment, I wouldn't mind if they took a year or two. Like, I would kind of forget about it, even if I were an ardent fan, and I would just get on with my life and read other things. But if they told me it was coming out May 19th, I would expect it by May 19th. And if it shifted, I would really lose confidence. Like, that trust would be broken. So, shit happens, but you can manage that by just managing your own expectations up front too. Like, if you've never done this before, why do you think it's going to all be done in a month? It just
Great
won't.
question.
Yes. It's like learning anything. Yeah, it's going to take time.
I think feedback can be often tricky to navigate. We don't always willingly accept feedback. So do you have any advice for authors on how best to handle feedback from editors?
Yeah, that is a good question. So take your time with it. When I'm delivering feedback, I usually deliver it about a week or so ahead of our scheduled call. So, here's my feedback, and let it percolate, talk to other people you trust to see if you agree with it. And then we'll talk about it. And you can discard anything that doesn't fit or doesn't work for you. Or if you have questions about something, we can talk through that. Feedback is always a suggestion. And it can really, sometimes feedback, and I'm saying feedback, but we all know we mean criticism, right? It can just land like criticism.
It's the red pen. It's so off-putting, right?
The red pen. Yeah. It doesn't matter if you change the color of it and track changes and it's not red anymore. It still feels like, oh no, they don't like it. They don't like me. I should just pack it in. And if you get back to the editor's intention, which is to really work with you to make this book better and reach that target reader, which you have identified and you and the editor have agreed is the goal. Think of the feedback as like a helping hand almost. Like, here, I think that we could make this better together. And it's not rejection or anything else. So if the feedback is pretty big, like, I think you should cut chapter 2, try to hold that like openly, like that, with that openness and curiosity, as I mentioned before, like, that's an interesting idea. I don't agree with that, might be your initial reaction. And then you think, okay, maybe I could repurpose that content somewhere else. Or yeah, maybe it would be a better chapter 12 than a chapter 2, and try it. And, some people love to prove their editor wrong. And I say, go for it. Like, if you can say, yeah, chapter 2 should be in there, like, convince me. But just know that it's something creative that we're doing together. It's not an editor on high saying, like, you suck. And like, how did you gain access to this writing equipment? You shouldn't do this anymore. Like, just try it again. Writing is not failure. Revision is not failure. It's really how we get to a better place with our creative work.
Nice. I like the editing being suggestions. That's a really great way to look at it. And, you can accept or challenge and then work together.
Absolutely. Yep.
So are there any trends that you're seeing in sort of like the editing or storytelling landscape? Anything that is kind of coming to mind that might be helpful for indie authors to be aware of?
Any trends? Well, we all know about like romantasy trends and kind of genre trends. I can't think of any off the top of my head in the genres I work in, which is mostly business and self-help and memoir. So maybe I'll pass on that one.
No problem.
Okay.
Storytelling is the same, right? The basis of a good story, kind of start, middle, end. I guess however you're shifting around, that is not really going to change all that much.
It's not really going to change. Yeah. Hero's journey is, a tried and true concept. Yep.
Okay. So some of the books that you've worked on have become national and international bestsellers and won prestigious awards. From your experience of working with an array of different authors, I'm just curious if there's any commonalities that you see with successful authors.
Yes, definitely. They take their work seriously, and I wouldn't even say that they don't take themselves seriously, because a lot of times they do, but it's really about committing to the work and being consistent. And consistency doesn't mean showing up at your desk every day at 5:30 in the morning to write. It's just committing to working on that book, every week or every month, just every something, to get it done. And so when they take their work seriously, that means taking their editor's feedback seriously, really engaging with their revisions, really thinking about who the target reader is going to be, and thinking about, okay, my editor has suggested cutting chapter 2. I really like it, but does the reader, is it going to work for the reader if I keep it in? Maybe not. And holding themselves to like a high standard when it comes to their writing, just working to make it better. And I hear this so often from writers, that they draft something and they can't quite get there, and then they come back to it the next writing session, maybe the next day, and suddenly it's so clear. So giving themselves the time, giving themselves the grace, and working with their energies and their tendencies. So what I mean by that is, if you know you're a morning person, write in the morning. If you know that you are a little easier on yourself in the afternoons, edit in the afternoons, edit your own work in the afternoons. Just understanding how you are and how you engage with yourself as a creative being is really key to finishing the work and having it recognized. And something like winning a big prestigious award is totally out of your hands, and to not let that be the goal. And sometimes writers will come to me and I say, what are your writing goals? And they say, I want to be a #1 New York Times bestseller. And I say, that's excellent. The chances of that happening are very, really slim. But what does that mean to you to have a #1 New York Times bestseller? Well, it means that people really like my book and read it and share it. Well, you can achieve that goal in other ways. That doesn't necessarily mean winning that award or landing on that bestseller list. And you might be on that bestseller list for a week, and then people stop reading it. And if your goal is to have people read it and share it for years to come, then bring that energy to the project. Because in my experience, when I look at awards and who's on the short list and then who wins, any one of those books could have won. And all around that short list are books that could have been nominated. And I can say that all those writers all brought that level of professionalism, and that's what brings them to the table. And then it comes down to juries, picking their favorites. So as long as you know that you have given it your best and tried to achieve that level of success that you set out for, then that's really key.
I think that's a great point, especially with indie authors who sometimes don't even get to play in this space of like bestseller lists or anything. And I think it's important to have goals that are achievable, but also meaningful. And it's not always going to be, my writing goal is I'm going to quit my day job in 6 months. Like that's maybe not the most achievable, but maybe it's like, okay, I want to try and see if I can reach a reader in Australia or write the next book or put all of these out. So yeah, making sure you're remembering the why of like why an author is doing something. And I guess like bringing the joy to the writing as well, because I think if you're only driven by something that's out of your control, that can't be good for the book writing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you need to have fun with it. And because the reader can tell if you have not enjoyed the writing process. I was working with a writer recently on a really rush project for basically the publisher wanted to update their editions. They said, can you write a new epilogue and do it in 10 days? And as the writer said, it's crazy enough to work. Like, let's try this. But we had a call to talk about what might go in the epilogue. And by the end of the call, she was laughing and having a good time. But as I said to her at the beginning of this call, you looked like a caged animal. Like I just could see the fear in your eyes. And like that's not the energy to bring to a project. You can't write from that space. So to work with your editor or your writing group or someone that you really trust to really find the joy and find the purpose of why you're doing this. Otherwise, it'll feel like drudgery. And I was going to say it feels like work, but sometimes work can be fun. Like it just feels like drudgery and you don't want to do it. And you start to resent the project and resent the reader. And that is the kiss of death.
Well, you are also a writer now with your book, Tracking Giants, which was about you trying to visit all of the biggest trees in British Columbia in Canada. And I just want to say I really, really enjoyed it. And that when I visited Vancouver Island for the first time, I dragged my friends to go see Big Lonely Doug because I had read Harley Rustad's book about it. So just wanted to throw that out there. And I guess what I liked about the book was that you sort of start off by trying to, just here's a checklist and you're trying to tick off all the boxes about big trees. And the biggest ones are called the champion trees. But it seems that you become quickly humbled by the giant task, which I intended the pun on the giant there. And I just thought about how the journey to your trees, it becomes more meaningful than actually finding the biggest trees. And that seems like, it could be an analogy for many things when it comes to writing or editing in the journey. And just curious about if you could tell us like your thoughts about everything and just how the book came about as well.
Yeah, sure. And thank you for reading it. I'm glad you liked it. So Tracking Giants grew out of a period of burnout. So when I just said about writers, you need to have fun with your creative work. I say that from a place of experience where I had been working as an editor for well over a decade and had sort of fallen out of love with the experience because I was working just really long hours on projects that weren't necessarily fulfilling and were leaving me depleted. And as we all know, as a creative person, you have to fill your own well. And I hadn't made a commitment to do that. So I was feeling pretty burned out. And around the same time, I decided to move home from Toronto to the West Coast where I grew up. And I was looking for a project that would really bring me back to myself and something that was not about books and publishing. And so my friend suggested that I go see all these champion trees, which I'd never heard of. And the champion trees, as you said, they're the biggest of their species, and they're the native trees in this case in British Columbia. And they are stored on this thing called the BC Big Tree Registry, which is an online database. And anyone can submit a tree to this database. So there are thousands of trees in this database. And when I started, there were 43 champion trees, and they were all over the province. And I thought, okay, I can probably do this in a year. And I didn't count on weather, inability to identify trees, the fact that these trees were growing on tops of mountains and down logging roads and on remote islands. The pandemic didn't help when I couldn't leave my small neighborhood in Vancouver to go to Vancouver Island and see the biggest trees. So gradually the project started to become another project, and I risked this burnout again. And I thought, this is pointless. Like, why am I doing this again? So it was sort of life-changing, this whole project, and writing this book, is I realized it was really about the creative process. And something as I've talked about here, something I say to my writers all the time is, be prepared for an ending you didn't expect. Like, be prepared for the book to change. And that's what happened with the project. I originally thought, okay, I'm going to complete this list and I'll be like really like hardy and very Pacific Northwest, and I'll know all these trees. And then I realized, like, oh, I'm an artist in the woods and I'm going to think about this creatively. So then I expanded the project to consider all sorts of trees, because the thing about champion trees is trees are mortal and they die and they fall down and they get hit by lightning. And so what was a champion yesterday is no longer the champion. And you can never actually put a bow on this thing. You can never actually complete this big goal that you set for yourself. And that's true of so many things in our life, like the perfect job, the perfect mate, the perfect home, the perfect body. And so I just cut myself some slack. And I used to be I'm still driven, but just like a really, really ambitious person. And I'm not really anymore. So that the whole book is really about adjusting your expectations and adjusting your sense of ambition and why you go out to set out to achieve certain goals.
And did you find the being in nature helped with your kind of coming back to the creative energy that you were seeking as well? I think you mentioned in the book something about, like, I'm going to butcher it now as I'm not a scientist, but like what the trees are giving out that are actually making you feel calmer or, like more at home. And I feel like anytime there's risk of burnout, they do say, just getting outside and walking and moving around. I wonder if you could chat to that for a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. So this concept of forest bathing, which is a Japanese concept.
I love that phrase so much, isn't it? It's
like, and we all can identify with this. You go for a walk in the woods and you feel better for it. And it's partially the fresh air and exercise. Also, seeing green and seeing nature has a calming effect on our minds. And then there's certain, I don't butcher this now because I haven't worked on this book in a while, but like the pheromones and the aerosols, there's certain aromatic compounds that are being passed from tree to tree. And depending on the tree, those, I think it's pinene. So from pine trees, they have a calming effect on the body. So, scientifically proven. But the other thing that is really calming, because originally it wasn't calming. I would rush out to find a tree. I would hike all day up a mountain to find a tree. And it was anything but calming. It was like high pressure, high stakes, high risk, high stupidity. And usually I just wanted to like have a snack, go pee, and then go home, like in that order. And yeah, I didn't find it at all creatively fulfilling. But then when I cut myself some slack, I could start to see, like, pardon this terrible hackneyed phrase, but like see the forest for the trees. Like you start to appreciate how the forest grows, how the trees grow, how they relate to each other. And you see anomalies like, oh, that tree usually grows straight, but here it's growing all gnarled. Like, that's interesting. And I was on a walk the other day through the forest, and I had this amazing, calming feeling where I said to myself, I'm so relieved I'm not looking for champion trees, because it was like the opposite. I was just like wandering around, enjoying the bird song. And when you're just making a beeline for something, you tend to miss all those things. And that's so true of a life. You're so focused on that goal that you forget all the good things along the way.
And it's kind of funny that you were not, I don't want to say, I guess, avoiding some of the burnout that has come from books that are trees, which is like you're sort of like going full circle. I mean, not ebooks that we work with, but, like that.
Exactly. Yeah. And as I say in the book, like I knew the big trees that I'd grown up with, like cedars and Douglas fir, like Big Lonely Doug is a Douglas fir. But mostly my understanding of trees was as blocks of wood, right? Which was what books are. They are pulped trees. And I just hadn't really thought about it. And most readers or most listeners probably have the same idea, unless they're arborists or foresters and they think about trees for a living. you probably haven't identified that tree outside your window, or maybe you know it intimately, but you don't know the other trees on the block. But just, I find working on that project opened me up to a new way of being in the world, where I was like, wow, like look at all these amazing beings around us who can be these permanent reminders of like times in our life, or of this deep time. We think about trees as being repositories of hundreds and thousands of years of time. It can really turn your mind inside out. And we get to experience this every day if we're lucky.
I know, because it's like Big Lonely Doug is like 1,000 years old, and I just couldn't wrap my head around that idea of like this thing
Yes.
living for that long. And something that's very charming that's happening in Toronto at the moment is I can't remember the association, but there's these somebody's making their own plaques for significant things around the city. Like there's one that's representing the Banjara parking lot payphone. There's one that's representing a site where Rose the wild turkey lived during the pandemic. There was a wild turkey that lived around Christie Pitts. But I saw one the other day and it just said enormous elm. I was reading it and it was just this elm tree that's just north of Christie Pitts that is over 100 years old, which doesn't seem that old, but it is for this area. I guess that was, it's a lot of newer trees and houses. But I just really liked somebody's taking the time to be like, hey, just stop for a second and just look at this giant tree.
Exactly. Like that podcast 99 PI would say, always read the plaque. And I know who's making those. I don't know if I want to say their name, but I know who's making those plaques.
Oh, you can tell me afterwards then, because I'm always seeking them. Those are the only 3 that are in my neighborhood, but I'm curious about the rest of them. They're utterly charming in just in the most Toronto way.
I love it so much, and I so craved plaques like that when I was looking for champion trees. But as the title keeps changing, you can't just expect someone to be running the plaque around the province. But yeah, they really stop and make us think, oh, that is interesting. And it's only interesting because we point it out, And that's something else I learned about trees is they don't care if you can identify them, if they are the biggest, if you came to see them, they are trees and they're just growing for themselves. And I would love us to give each other and ourselves the same level of grace and kindness,
I could keep talking to you about trees, but my team, if they're listening, they make fun of me for reading books about the most boring subjects. So I'll swiftly move on from trees. I know.
But my book, if I can be so bold, it's not a typical book about trees.
Oh, 100% not. No, it's about like everything we've just talked about.
Yes. So if you're listening and you're like, oh, I don't know if I want to read another book about trees, it's actually not really about trees. And because I got kind of bored writing that book myself. And like I said, kiss of death. So I thought I'm going to write about something that will interest me.
Well, I want to ask you about your experience as an editor and how that influenced your writing process. And how was your relationship with your editor?
I think that we should, let's bring her on. Yeah, no, that would be really funny if I could just pull her on. But yeah, I hope that it made me easier to work with. I suspect that it didn't, because I know a lot about the industry and I have really high standards for editing. So I definitely held my editor to my standards, which isn't fair because my editor is an excellent editor, by any standard. And she did a wonderful job, whether I was tracking it or not. But I think that really wasn't a fair way for me to approach the edit, even if it didn't come across that way to her. But yeah, what really surprised me about the process was I now have a lot more empathy for writers, having gone through it, because as an editor, you give the revisions and they make total sense to you and you're like, just cut chapter 2. But as the writer, it brings up so many more questions about how is that going to work? It's going to leave this big hole in the book. That's not what I set out to do. And it takes longer than you think. And all these things. It's like my chickens came home to roost. So that's why I'm really, after working on that project, I really try to be a friend to the writers I work with and say, like, if this doesn't work for you, let me know. If this is going to take more time, let me know. Like, just, it's okay if the deadline moves, because I know how hard it is. Like, writing is uniquely hard and no one's keeping track of you sitting down at your computer every day. So you might want to watch TV instead, or go look for another tree in the woods. So yeah, that's really how it changed, was just, I realized, okay, I need to lighten up on myself, lighten up on my editor, who's doing a wonderful job. And yeah, just kind of go with the flow a bit.
I guess it's easy to say like, oh, just kill your darlings. But when they're your darlings, you're like, oh, it's actually not easy.
Oh, I totally fought my editor on so many lines, and she's like, I don't think people will get this joke. And it's like, oh, they will. They totally will. And
you're like, you don't even understand how funny I am. Come on.
Yeah, I'm like, you don't understand Surrey humor. I grew up in Surrey. And yeah, some people get it and some people don't. But I wrote the book for a very specific subset of people. And that is something also that I think writers need to think about, is you can make your audience really small. And that is actually a way to reach more people. Because if you try to generalize and make a huge audience, it tends to bland out the content. So I didn't write the book for like tree lovers and arborists and foresters and people who love their like neighborhood elm. It's really for like artists in the woods and creative people and people who would read the book and never dream about looking for a champion tree. Maybe don't even like trees. It's really about something else.
Do people not like trees?
Monsters. Heathens. I mean, some people just, they don't get it, but they like other things. And so, but if like the book could have been about visiting ice cream parlors, like it's really just about visiting all of one thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so are you writing anything at the moment?
I am. Yeah. I'm poking away at something totally different, and it's pretty early days, but I'm at that. I think some listeners will really relate, where you're kind of staring at it and you're like, is this anything? Should I keep going? Maybe. I'm at that stage where I'm like, I don't know.
So too early to tell us about it.
Yes, too early, but hopefully sometime, or maybe it won't be anything. We'll see. And that's okay too. If something's not working, you can discard it and start over.
Is it hard to balance your writing with your editing work?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Very much so. Yeah. I find that editing uses a certain part of your brain, and that's the same part that writing uses. And that's one reason it took me a while. It took me longer than planned to finish the book, because I was editing a lot and I needed a big break. So I took a sabbatical from my job to finish the book. So yeah, I find that when I'm editing a lot, I can't write. And so that's why I'm standing at this point looking at the book thinking, okay, if I want to go ahead with this, I need to edit a bit less to actually finish this. And is that something I want to do? Like, is the project worth doing that right now?
Tough decisions ahead of you.
Yeah, but they're fun. It's all creative. And I don't feel, sometimes people think of editors kind of wrongly or unkindly as like failed writers, and they're not. They're another version of writers. We're just coming at it from a different direction. So if I can think of editing as really creative, I don't feel depleted. Like, I don't feel that I'm not getting to my true work or anything. But once I'm in that editing mindset, it's hard to shift into a writing mindset.
Well, are you reading anything fun right now? Do you have any book recommendations?
I am in a bit of a reading lull right now, but I'm reading a book about gardening called In the Garden of Time, and I can't even remember the author's name right now. Sorry,
okay.
I think
We'll
I need to cut this out because I can't think of any books I'm reading, mostly about climate, and they're not very fun.
Have you read The Language of Trees?
The Peter Walbin one?
No, there's a book called it's an Irish author actually, by Katie Holton.
Oh, Katie Holton. Yes. No, I haven't read it.
I read it earlier this year, and it is just beautiful. It's like, for the listeners, it's like basically a gathering of snippets of people's work about trees, but each page, she basically makes her own typeset and alphabet from trees. So it's like, the A will be a corresponding tree, and B, C, D, et cetera, et cetera. So each page is like making a little bit of a forest on, and it's just like this beautiful thing. And it was really nice to, you just pick up and you're learning all these different things about trees. And there's like, a chapter from a book that'll happen to just make something. But yeah, I found it very inspiring to read, and something that I like, a book that you don't have to, start to finish. You can just like pick it up and whenever you need it, you can dip in. So I would recommend that.
Yeah. And I'm about to go on vacation, so I've assembled my reading list so I can tell you what I'm excited about reading.
Great.
Because of having that reading lull. Yeah, I can tell you what books I've read over the last few months. But I'm excited to read Is a River Alive by Robert Macfarlane, who wrote The Old Ways and Underland and just wonderful books about the natural world. That comes, I think it just came out. And then I edit books about business and productivity. So I'm going to dip into some of Cal Newport's books, which are, I don't know, admirable in their scope. And I like to just keep on top of what people are publishing these days. And then I haven't read Educated, and I need to. So that is also on the list. We'll see how far I get.
But do you count the books you're editing as the books you're reading as well?
No, I should. No.
You should. Your list would be higher.
Journal. It would be higher. I know, I get those ticks. But yeah, I mean, I've edited probably thousands of books by this stage, but it's just different because I'll also read them multiple times. And so at the end of the day, if I've been reading all day for work, I just want to watch TV. Or go outside. Fair. And TV is so good right now, and it's, we're talking about storytelling earlier, like that is a place to kind of reflect on storytelling, like Severance, like the storytelling in that. I'm like, okay, how would you bring this to a book? I sometimes think about that if I'm watching an intricately told story in a visual form, like how would this land on the book? Or how did they write this screenplay if it's based or adapted from a book? Yeah, I find that pretty fascinating.
Nice. Well, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time. You're
so welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
And where can our listeners find you online if they'd like to learn more?
Yeah, so you can go to www.amandalewis.org, and I have resources there and just more information about editing. And you can follow me on LinkedIn. And I post weekly about writing and editing. As much for editors as for writers, because I like to give editors tips on how they can better connect with clients and do so in a way that won't strain themselves or burn themselves out. So yeah, check those out.
Great, thank you. And we'll link to these in the show notes as well. Thank you for listening to the Kobo Writing Life podcast. If you're interested in picking up Amanda's books or learning to work with her, we'll include links to this and her website in our show notes. If you're enjoying this podcast, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. And if you're looking for more tips on growing your self-publishing business, you can find us at kobowritinglife.com. Be sure to follow us on social media. We are at Kobo Writing Life on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Threads. This episode was hosted by Tara Kremen with production by Terrence Abrahams. Editing is provided by Kelly Robotham, and our theme music was composed by Tearjerker. And thank you to Amanda for being such a great guest. If you're ready to start your publishing journey, sign up today at kobo.com/writinglife. Until next time, happy writing.